Why is it that after almost 6 years, just over 6 years, of the SARS-CoV-2, the COVID virus, infecting everywhere that we have across the world, and at the same time that the virus continues to circulate, something is wrong? And it seems as though nobody really wants to say why. But you have to keep on asking the question. They will tell you it's because of all the variants. But what you have to realize is that the variations to the virus, to the spike protein, are so small that a normal immune system can still pick up the virus. What we're faced with is that across the world, a lot of immune systems are not able to recognize variants of the virus. And if they recognize it, they're not responding to it. The question is why? So here is an important paper, and this is what I'll be talking about today. Elevated SARS-CoV-2 IgG4 in plasma and mucosa following repeated mRNA boosters impact antibody functions to Omicron and sarbecoviruses. These are the viruses like SARS-CoV-2. The research is finally coming through. I mean, we've been saying this for years now. It was very clear that something was wrong, but it seems as though these questions are taking a very long time to get to the attention. So what you have to do is first understand a little bit about the science. And again, basic stuff. This is what the virus would look like. The blue parts on it represent the spike protein, which are trimers. That means that each one, there are about 25 on the surface of each viral particle. So in theory, there are about 75 binding points. It infects the upper airway. Then, once it infects the cells, it continues to spread either down into the lungs or out. But once it has penetrated the mucosal barrier, it gets into the bloodstream. And this is what caused problems with severe COVID-19. And the virus got into the bloodstream and the immune system overreacted. And so everything is about trying to minimize the virus breaking through the protective mucosal layer of immunity and getting into the bloodstream. It's a very simple but really, really important point that a lot of people don't quite grasp. They seem to think that lack of symptoms is good. I'm telling you that by the time you finish this, you should realize that we are sitting on a problem here that really needs to be addressed and carefully thought about. The mucosal defense is very sophisticated. It has multiple layers, including the fact that this mucus layer, which is green, the cilia sweeping it away, these hairs, even if the virus gets into a cell and replicates and tries to break through this barrier, it has to get through the immune defense. All of this is in place to protect you. And the mucosal immune system is exceptionally effective. This is why you're facing multiple viruses and bacteria every day. If you go on the subway, on the train, at work, wherever you are, people are coughing and sneezing. Why don't you get infected every time? Because you have an effective mucosal immune system. So, why is there a problem with this concept of IgG4? Okay, you may have heard about it, but it doesn't seem to make sense. I'll break it down simply for you. Antibodies are what your body uses to target problems at a distance. It's kind of like a missile. You know, your immune cells produce antibodies and they then float in the bloodstream and they can bind to viruses or bacteria and allow the immune system to mop them up. And you have multiple different kinds of antibodies or immunoglobulins. IgM is early and it's a big one. It's 5 of these connected together. IgD, we don't talk too much about. We'll come back to IgG IgA is what is used in the mucosal lining, especially secretory IgA, to bind. And it's important to note that it doesn't usually trigger an inflammatory response, but it helps the immune system to clear bacteria and viruses. And IgE is about allergies. Okay? Where we're talking about is the IgG. This is the most dominant antibody that's in your bloodstream. And in the IgG, you have four different classes. Just remember that IgG1 and IgG3 are the ones that explode. These are the missiles that, when they hit their target, they trigger immune responses. We'll leave out IgG2 for the moment. IgG4 is your dud antibody. It tells your immune system to stand down. So you fire this one, and instead of it exploding, it just makes a little sound because it's telling you, don't worry, this antigen that I'm targeting is not a problem. Relax. Don't overreact. That's the problem with IgG4. So, as I said, when you think about it, when you get infected, if you need to clear the virus, what you need are not IgG4 antibodies. You need IgG1 and IgG3. Now, the reality is that if this gets overreactive, you can get severe COVID. But if it becomes IgG4, you can't effectively clear the virus. This is where we are now, where a lot of people cannot effectively clear the virus. And it's because they probably have IgG4. When we looked at the studies, and this was from in 2022, we found that after the third dose of mRNA, there was a 4,000% increase of IgG4 tolerant antibodies. We were told nothing to see here, not a problem, no big deal. This is an absolute red flag because you're dealing with quite a serious virus. It tolerates the infection. When these antibodies bind to the virus, the immune system stands down. It doesn't try and munch them up and destroy them. It goes, okay, this has got a diplomatic pass. Let them through. That's a problem because this virus does a lot of damage when it gets inside cells. When we looked at another study, and this was from way back when in 2023, it was very clear that mRNA infection caused almost 40% of the antibodies to be IgG4. That's the yellow. You can see here it's up to 45.7% if there was no infection. You compare this to somebody who had recovered from COVID, they have 1% of IgG4. This is not normal. Very important. Whatever people tell you, it is not normal. So, with that background, you then have to come back to the paper. Because what were they looking at? And this was a paper that was done in Australia. So you can see Melbourne, Australia. And they were looking at elevated SARS-CoV-2 IgG4 levels following repeated COVID-19 mRNA boosters may impact blood and mucosal antibody functions against Omicron variants and the sarbecoviruses. This is important. They realized now, finally, that maybe this IgG4 is a problem because it doesn't take a genius to start to realize that, you know what, if hybrid immunity is so effective, why is the virus still circulating? The immune system should be able to tolerate it. And guess what? The thing that I'm trying to highlight, because nobody wants to study it, is in areas of the world that have very low COVID vaccination rates, like Papua New Guinea or Haiti. Do they have the same kind of problem? They probably don't. But nobody will want to study that, because if they did, it would demonstrate pretty clearly that natural immunity was superior to hybrid immunity. Now, if you've forgotten, you are told it's the other way around. My rule of thumb is you can never beat nature and physiology. You will never be better than it. So, with that in mind, they then did a study looking specifically at plasma and saliva samples collected pre and post mRNA boosters from people who had two types of vaccines, either the mRNA or the adenovirus vaccines. And they were looking at the IgG4 responses. They found that the plasma and salivary IgG4 antibodies, which bind Omicron variants, increased post-booster across both cohorts. But it's important to note that increased significantly more in the cohorts that had mRNA. So this seems to be primarily an mRNA-related issue. Additionally, what they found is that when they looked, although non-neutralizing responses, that means how well the antibodies neutralize the viruses, so non-neutralizing, they don't do it particularly well, this improved significantly post-booster. They negatively correlated with IgG4 against all the variants. So IgG4 is impacting on the ability of the immune system to neutralize the virus. Immune imprinting. Now, this is a biggie. Immune imprinting. I need to highlight this. What this is saying is that the immune system is now fixed on the original variant in a lot of people. So when they are faced with updated variants, they are still responding to the original variant. I had a slide that demonstrated this. This is where I was trying to see if I could find a way of getting it into an image. And the way that I did it was this. This is effectively what I said happens, which is that on the left in orange is the original Wuhan virus. The Omicron variant is now in purple. Similar style of hair, similar size, similar smile, similar face. But because the border patrols are taught that the virus is variant, that's kind of a simplistic way of trying to explain what is happening. And this is therefore why we have immune imprinting, where the immune system, not only is it reacting just or primarily to the original variant that was multiple iterations down the line, but it's producing IgG4 as well. And when we look at this here, you can see that the immune imprinting based IgG4 responses towards the ancestral receptor binder motif, limiting neutralizing IgG4 antibodies towards Omicron variants. Additionally, increased proportions of class-switching IgG also corresponded to decreasing concentrations of spike-specific IgG. Remember, I told you that the IgG1 is what explodes. This is what triggers your immune system. IgG4 tells it to stand down. So they're having increased proportions of stand down antibodies with lower levels of responsive antibodies. How in the world are they going to neutralize a virus? They can't. And this would then make sense why in highly vaccinated regions, we just see ongoing circulation. I mean, it is now twice a year that you're seeing surges of infection. Now, this is the part that I think that I had to really reflect on and think carefully about it. You would have heard a lot of people talking about, You know what? I've been vaccinated and I have had no infection. Now, we know that's not possible because everybody has been exposed. So there are only two options. Either their infection was so mild that they didn't notice it. That's one part of the problem, but invariably you get a variant that triggers an immune response, or they no longer respond immunologically to the virus. That means they're really getting an IgG4 response that tolerates the viral infection. Now, to emphasize this, I'm trying to find one of the images in this paper that I think highlights this point very, very clearly. And it's looking at what happens in terms of the RNA, the mRNA response in terms of IgG4. Remember, IgG4 is a tolerant antibody. When we look at this image, this is figure 1, and they are looking at pre-dose 3 percentage of IgG4 to total IgG, okay? Pre-dose 3, 2 weeks dose 3, 12 weeks dose 3. And you can see here that there is a slight rise, gradually going up from about maybe 10 to 15 up to 20%. When they go to pre-dose 4, and then they give the doses of mRNA, this is where the percentage of IgG4 in some people are. Now, look at this carefully. Of the cohort, and this may be about maybe let's just under 10%. I think it was 7 to 9%. The percentage of IgG4 is between 50 to 100%. Looking at this here, I would estimate that some of them were up to maybe 80% of the IgG antibodies were IgG4. You will notice that there are still a lot of people who still had low levels of IgG4, although it's still higher than the 1% that you get in the convalescent. But as it rises, these people become more and more tolerant. And this cohort here is not going to have any responses. Now, this is what I found very interesting. Now, let's think about this. Because you'd have met multiple people with different responses, especially over the Christmas and New Year, everybody chatting about COVID and so on. And you would come across some people who would say, I'm up to my 8th or 9th dose and I've never had COVID. What you'd have to ask them is, after their 3rd or 4th dose, did they get any response to vaccination? Or did they get any response to any exposure? If they say no, every time I get my dose, I'm absolutely fine. I have no temperature, no aches, nothing. That probably suggests somebody who has high levels of IgG4. Their immune system is just not responding. It doesn't respond to either the vaccine or the infection. It's produced. I mean, if you look at this, just reflect on this a minute. Some people have almost 80% of their total IgG being IgG4. This is after dose 4. Can you imagine what it's like after dose 8 or dose 9? This is scary, because it also means if their immune system is now tolerant of the infection and they're not having a response because they don't even have a temperature, they don't have a runny nose, they don't have a sore throat, nothing, how are they going to clear the virus? And are these people now representative of what I describe as super spreaders? They're infected all the time with no response, and because they are fine, they never even think to check. And therefore, in reality, they're continuing to spread virus everywhere. I mean, this is my thought, because 80% of the IgG4 being IgG4 is a humongous number. And it makes sense that they wouldn't therefore respond to an infection. And the fact that they have no response even to vaccination would be potentially a red flag. This is where we are now, because now what does it mean when they get an infection if they don't clear it? And you almost have a persistent, ongoing sinus infection that circulates. And I mean, when this paper looked at the levels of IgG4 in saliva, it means that it's not effectively binding up virus when it gets into their mucosal system. It's almost 15% in saliva. And so all of this indicates that we have a cohort of the population that are unable to address infection of any variant of the virus. And I don't know how we get around this problem, because the reality is that everybody remains in the long term at risk, because even if you have natural immunity wanes after a while. If you're stressed, if you're tired, if something else is going on, your immune system drops. If you happen to be in a high exposure environment at that time, you can get another infection. That's the reality across the board. But more and more, what we're seeing is people who no longer respond to the infection. They have no symptoms whatsoever. That is worrying. And that means that the population's immune system has fundamentally been damaged. I'm sure that nobody will take responsibility for this. Everybody will just move on. But at some point, this dam has got to break, because it is not sustainable to have a virus of this capability freely circulating through people and through the population. I don't at the moment have an answer, because nobody would listen anyway. But I do suspect that based on the science, this is eventually going to blow up in our faces. We just don't quite know when. Thank you.
A hero, an immune adventure. Humming Heroes, your lyrical guide to the body's defenders. Now on Amazon. Check the links below.